The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson. Today, I am once again joined by Dr. Emma Cahill Marron. Emma, welcome back.
It's Dr. Emma from now on, Rebecca.
I'm sorry. Dr. Emma, welcome back.
Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm good. I still want to come up with a theme song for every episode that you're on because I think you need a Dr. Emma song.
I think we do. I'll think about it too. Let's see if we come up with something good.
I think that's good. And if you're listening and you have an idea, go ahead and contact us and let us know.
Yeah. This is turning into a whole thing that I'm enjoying so much. I've always been a bit of an attention seeker. I'm not going to lie. So I'm enjoying the spotlight.
We're going to figure something out.
Yeah, we will.
Well, speaking of spotlight, we have a hardcore topic to talk about today. It might be controversial to some, but we're going to talk about Katherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, I want to say, choose a team, right? When we start looking at Tudor history, are we team Katherine or are we team Anne? And it always comes out that team Anne is larger than team Katherine, but that's not really fair, is it?
Well, what team do you think I am on?
I'm pretty sure you're on team Katherine.
Yay! Yes, Catalina de Aragon. Yes, team Catalina. I think it's great that they get all this attention and they bring people into history, both of them. I think that Katherine of Aragon does it on a larger scale. She does it for, connects Spain to England, and people in Spain know her and know that. So I think if we put together the number of admirers worldwide, it's probably Katherine has a lot more than Anne Boleyn, who is very popular in English-speaking countries, not as much in the Spanish-speaking world, I must say. So maybe, Team Katherine is bigger. So we think of international standards, not Tudor court standards. Katherine of Aragon is a European figure that is recognized worldwide for her contributions to women's education, to developing humanism for women. And also because we've talked about this a million times, she's a daughter of Isabella of Castile, who's an iconic female figure, the first really big queen of the Renaissance. So when you are, for example, in Spain or in other places that are not England or the United States, where Anne Boleyn is people who are into the Tudors find her very attractive. And I see why. It's a very soap opera story that she has with Henry. In the case when we're talking about in academia or in an international setting, the contributions of Katherine of Aragon are much larger and are valued a lot because she changes education for women. She develops a relationship with a leading humanist that writes a whole syllabus, not just for Mary Tudor, but all Christian women. This is a revolution in the education of women, and therefore she has that place in history, really. So aside of the things that happened to her with Henry.
So it's fair to say that in the English-speaking countries, that Katherine of Aragon is far underrated.
Oh, yes. I think that because she's in the very start of the Anglican Reformation, even people that like her are torn between that beginning of their religion, I think. This is my view. And I want to be respectful because that's something that I respect a lot. So you have to respect your faith when you have it. So you have to understand how it started. So she's really a controversial figure. And for many, many years, there were historians, male historians, that put a lot on her not caving to Henry's wishes, not understanding that he needed a son. So she's been seen as someone who was old-fashioned or too pious, or always there's an undertone in a lot of those books of she didn't do things right. And those books have been very influential. So I'm thinking about the very famous book of The Six Wives by David Starkey.
Yes, there's a lot of those six wives.
Of Katherine of Aragon in that. Sorry, I interrupted you. See, this time I didn't do it. But I talk about Starkey, I get a bit agitated. As many women do. because it's appalling the way. And I've read this book many times. I haven't read it in depth for Anne Boleyn and the other wives. Obviously, I concentrated more related to my research. But the way he treats Catherine, it's just appalling. It's not acceptable. So I think that does, when those books are written and they become so popular, they do have an effect on people. And I think this is what happens with Catherine of Aragon. I think she's having a comeback, though.
I think so too. And I think even anyone who is Team Anne would agree that Henry treated Catherine poorly.
Yes. Henry and Anne.
Yes.
Let's not forget, Anne treated Catherine very poorly, betrayed her, mistreated her, looked for her downfall, when really Catherine had given her everything that she had. Why don't we know when Anne Boleyn was born? Because she wasn't relevant, right? Why don't we know before she was, and I'm getting ahead of myself, gone to the court of Margaret of Austria? Because she was no one, really.
Right.
So Catherine gives her this education because she's doing the same thing that her mother does in the Spanish court, in the English court. She does this for Anne, and she sends her to a friend, Margaret of Austria, her relative, her sister-in-law. Right? So when she comes back, and I know, I want to understand Anne Boleyn too, because the pressure of the king pursuing you relentlessly is very difficult to sustain. So I want to understand her too, because this pressure, her whole family's future really lied on what she would accept or not from the king. And I think becoming his mistress would have been an error that her sister already made, right?
Right.
Well, an error. Did they have an option? I don't think they did. We always talk about how Henry was and how he was like a little boy that got what he wanted. So I'm torn. There's things I want to understand about Anne Boleyn. There's things I would never ever understand that she did.
Right. Yeah.
Her treatment of Mary, for example.
We're gonna get to all of that.
Well, yeah, and she really apologizes to her at the end of her life because she knows she hasn't done well. So, I feel like she's just a human being trying to navigate a very complicated life. She was not the daughter of a king and a queen. She was not the aunt of an emperor like Catherine was. Catherine was, her self-esteem as a woman, as a royal woman, was built from day one. She was royalty through and through. Her mother was a ruling queen, and you can't fight that because she was the most similar to her mother, and she had the best humanists teaching her. There's no competition there. I'm sorry, but that's the truth and the reality. And then she had a character that went well with that. Katherine of Aragon was a very calm person that could, and we've talked about this before, just sit back and think about, well, this is happening right now and it's not very comfortable, but I'll figure it out. We'll do something about it later on. Henry's just having one of his fits. Right?
Right.
What do you think about all of this, Rebecca? You seem to be I'm just
listening.
What do you think about the relationship between Anne and Catherine? Come on, we want to know what you think.
No, I'm pleading the fifth on this because I can't take sides.
I'll try, guys. I'm trying. I'll ask her again later on. She might give us something.
What I really want to start off with is understanding Catherine sending Anne to Margaret of Austria, because I think if you watch any of these historical fiction series or read historical fiction, the impression is usually that it wasn't Catherine. Catherine had nothing to do with it, and that
wasn't there.
It was Anne's father and his connection to Margaret's court that got Anne there. Right. So can you maybe go into that a little bit, the role as the queen consort and educating the young girls of the kingdom, maybe?
Exactly. Think about this. So we don't know when Anne was born. So there's a debate, right? Whether she was born in 1500, 1507. I think those are the two dates that most people are debating. So we don't know really when she goes to the court of Margaret of Austria. I have an idea. There's some documents that might be there that might come out soon or not. Let's see. But then the important thing to think about is that, for example, in 1511, Catherine of Aragon has a baby boy, Henry. And she sends a message to Margaret of Austria in French to say, I just had a boy and you are going to be godmother of this boy. And this is just telling us how close they still were. Margaret had taught Catherine French in the Spanish court because the Queen of England had asked Margaret to teach, Isabella to say, hey, they're together. Nobody here speaks Latin, none of the women or Spanish. So why doesn't Margaret teach Catherine French? And she does. So they have a bond that starts in the Spanish court, and they're sisters-in-law forever. Those bonds are not broken because of death in the Renaissance, or when there's separation or whatever. Those bonds are forever. And then the most important thing is Margaret and Catherine share a common nephew that becomes the most powerful man in Europe, Charles V. And Margaret raises this nephew in Michelin. So when she's taking women from the English court, is because of Catherine's relationship to her and the bonds that they're trying to. Charles of Habsburg, who's been raised by Margaret of Austria, was betrothed to Mary Tudor in 1508 before the reign of Henry VIII. They're already working on these marriages. So someone like Anne Boleyn's father, who was a diplomat, you send his daughters there to create more connections because these women will come back and marry men from that alliance. So it's basically favoring. I know it's difficult to think about Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands as Spanish, but this is a larger alliance than just Spain. It's the future of Charles V and the court that Catherine is trying to create in England to favor and strengthen that bond with Charles V, Margaret, and all the Habsburgs. So this is why these ladies are sent to Margaret of Austria, so they can become trained in the same. And Catherine is transforming the court, the English court, to look like the court of Margaret of Austria. She is the first monarch, Henry and her are the first monarchs to have a portrait gallery. The majority of those portraits are coming from the court of Margaret of Austria. And listen to this. Some of those portraits that come during the time of Margaret of Austria, the same size as the portraits of Isabella and Ferdinand, they were created to be exhibited together. So this is why we have to think about Margaret of Austria as someone favoring the Spanish alliance. And another thing that this is very interesting, one of the biggest myths about Anne Boleyn, she was very fashionable and she transformed fashion in England, right?
Right.
That is not true. It was Katherine of Aragon when she arrived to England with her huge dowry, and the style in the Spanish court of Isabella was a Flemish style. This style that everybody talks about, introduces the French style, is the French Flemish. It's of the court of Margaret of Austria. If you see, and you can go to the website of the Royal Collection Trust, see some of these portraits in the 1510s that arrived from the court of Margaret of Austria of Catherine's nieces. They're already wearing these French hoods and the same style that Anne Boleyn wears famously later on. So because we have seen Catherine over and over with an English fashion, because she would wear that too to make statements. This is the permanent image that we have of Catherine, but she was the most fashionable woman in England since the beginning of the century, and she transformed fashion.
What you're saying is Katherine of Aragon was wearing the French hood well before Anne Boleyn was.
Yes, she was 50. She was her queen. She was 15. Well, depends on when Anne was born. Yes, I don't know why, and I see why, and I don't see why. This rivalry between them then doesn't get analyzed in terms of. It seems like we have to say that Anne was very fashionable, Catherine has to be unfashionable. To say that Anne Boleyn's religion was very innovative, Catherine has to be from the old religion. The Catholic faith was nothing but old in the time that we're talking about, because, and this is something that is never put in relation. And I think I'm so surprised sometimes when I find out about these things. We have all heard about a certain Erasmus of Rotterdam, right?
Yeah.
Probably the most famous humanist of the Renaissance. He wrote a book on Christian matrimony for Catherine of Aragon in 1526. It was published. 1526 on marriage. That is the same year that Hans Holbein the Younger arrives to England. This book written by Erasmus, and let's not forget that Erasmus of Rotterdam was the one to send Holbein with letters of recommendation to Thomas More, right?
Yes.
This book that Erasmus writes for Catherine of Aragon in 1526 on marriage, not another subject, on marriage. The frontispiece is by Holbein. And in the dedication to Queen Catherine, where he references Queen Isabella to, he mentions a painter's work. And there is in the Emmanuel College, there is what is the presentation copy, because Erasmus dedicates it to Catherine. Erasmus Rotterdami dono misit, next to the Holbein frontispiece. So it's Catherine who facilitates the arrival of someone like Holbein. It's just this hasn't been put into relation, because then when we have people saying, oh, Anne Boleyn, she advanced very innovative religious ideas. So did Catherine of Aragon. Extremely innovative religious ideas, since Luther comes out, for example, and she has Alonso de Villasanta write a book against Luther the same way that Henry does. But this has not been written about. And that's why she seems like someone old-fashioned when she's quite the contrary. She brings Juan Luis Vives, who has been learning Greek with Erasmus of Rotterdam, to England to make the syllabus of Mary Tudor, but she does something extra that her mom had not done. She wants all Christian women to be educated. How radical is this? This is. Anne Boleyn is learning this from Catherine. They can be rivals, but when you have a rival, you learn from them too, right? Let's talk about that. It was Catherine of Aragon who was the woman to change everything in the Tudor court, and Anne Boleyn was copying from that, which is normal. If you have a rival, you have to defeat them, and sometimes if they're extremely powerful, like Catherine was, you have to use the same techniques and you have to mimic them, right? That's how I see it. Maybe people don't want to see that, because that would make a lot more Team Catherine fans, don't you think?
I think so, most definitely. It's interesting. So Anne is sent to Margaret of Austria. She is well educated there. She goes back to England.
Well, she's in the French court too with Queen Claude. But listen to this.
Oh,
while she's in the service of Queen Claude is exchanging portraits with Catherine of Aragon. When the Dauphin is born, when the son of Francis I and Queen Claude is born, he's betrothed to Mary Tudor. And it's Queen Claude who sends a portrait of the little boy to Catherine for the betrothal. It's the women who are exchanging these portraits. So she's in contact and good friends with Queen Claude while Anne Boleyn is there. We don't have a lot of those letters, or we haven't found them yet, but I am sure Catherine of Aragon always talked about her ladies and favored her ladies, and she writes a lot of letters that we do have to her father. This lady wants to get married. I want to help her. This lady wants to become a nun. I gave her one of my jewels so she can take it to this convent to become a nun. In one case, with a Spanish of ladies, after she has a terrible delivery and her baby dies, one of her ladies that assists her, she's like, I want to become a nun. You can't blame the woman, right? So Catherine gives her a jewel, and then when she arrives to Spain, the father takes away the jewel and says, no, this is ours, you're going to marry. And it is Catherine who sends a message to her father saying, you must punish this man, because I, your daughter, Infanta of Spain, gave this to this woman. So, and the woman becomes a nun, and the dad is punished, because status, bloodline is above gender. And Catherine is a daughter of Ferdinand, the daughter that he says to her one time, you are the daughter that I love the most. You are the daughter that served me the best. She's just a really good strategic person. So when Anne Boleyn is in with Margaret of Austria and then Queen Claude, Catherine of Aragon is aware of everything. everything.
Wow. I think it's just so easy to pin the women against each other or just
Mm-hmm.
focus on one story and not the other.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no denying that Anne Boleyn came back to
Mm-hmm.
England
Mm-hmm.
and caught the eye of King Henry at the perfect time.
Well, they say that, but 1522, right? But at the same time, are people not thinking that Queen Claude was in the field of cloth of gold? So Anne
Mm.
must have been there. I mean,
Interesting.
1520, I don't think they were that far off. I mean, I think it could have been before. They were in France in 1520. I don't know why people don't talk more about that if she's serving Queen Claude or if she is back with Margaret of Austria. Now I'm not sure because I think she serves Margaret and then she goes to the French court until she comes back to England. They don't know. Doesn't matter because in 1520, Catherine of Aragon is with Queen Claude in the Field of Cloth of Gold, and then is with Margaret of Austria they visit Margaret of Austria. This is not something. This is the bomb today. This is not something people write about. They go into Gravelines and they have a big high mass with all the members of the Habsburgs there. After Susanna Hornbuch gives Charles that portrait that we've talked about in the previous episode. So Anne Boleyn was there way before she came back to England. She could have caught Henry VIII's eye, I'm sure. And I'm sure that when they met with the French court and when they met with Margaret of Austria, if they were English ladies, they would have been, look at them, how well they're doing. And they would have done a dance and recited some French. I'm sure the Queen, the same way Catherine was very aware of Mary Tudor's level of Latin when she entrusted her to Master Featherstone when they were going to Ludlow in 1525. She was very, if she would have, she sent, and she did send Anne Boleyn to Margaret of Austria and then Queen Claude, she would have known, how's her French doing? And she would have talked to her in French because she knew French and she knew Latin too.
Hmm.
So, I mean,
Hmm.
I think that Catherine of Aragon was always very aware what her ladies were doing. And if she was investing in someone like she did in Anne Boleyn, she was very aware of the progress. This is the evidence for all the other ladies that she had.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be fair, I think at the Field of Cloth of Gold, and Sister Mary would have been there first. And we know that Henry had an affair with Mary as well.
Well, I think Mary had an affair with Francis the First too, didn't she?
I think that's what Francis made it sound like, right?
Right. And and that's one thing that we always have to be careful about, right? When a man is saying something like that, is it a reality or is it not? Or is he just trying to, for some reason, Francis said it. So for some reason, he wasn't happy about, because what he said wasn't like she was great, right? So something must have happened. Something must have happened for the Boleyn sisters to not have a great reputation in England, in France. And
Mm.
Francis says something like that. Francis said horrible things about other women too. In the case of Catherine, he never said she had slept around. What he said that she was ugly and deformed and old. So and she was starting to be not. She was never ugly because no woman is ugly, but she was starting to be big, and she was a very short woman, and she had many awful pregnancies. So yes, probably a very short woman that's had lots of bad pregnancies has a different figure too. And then with those big dresses that they wear and everything. And let's
Mhm.
not forget that Catherine of Aragon didn't have dinner with Francis the First, dressed in full Spanish attire, which was a slap in his face because Francis was at war with Charles V and the Spanish monarchy. And he was taken prisoner in 1525 after the Battle of Pavia. So, I mean, this was a guy, they hated each other. Catherine and Francis hated each other. What was he going to say about Catherine of Aragon? She's old, deformed, and this and that.
Right.
Especially because I think at that time, the age gap between Henry VIII, who didn't have to have any pregnancies, and Catherine becomes evident because she's aging like any woman who's gone through trauma, like 7 failed pregnancies and what, you know what I mean? But in the other hand, when they talk about the Boleyn sisters in France, they there's accounts that say that they were developing this education very well, but then there's this comment from Francis, and I don't know what to make out of it really, because it seems like for some reason he didn't like Mary Boleyn very much.
I think Francis the First was a womanizer, and I mean, he got syphilis, didn't he? I think.
Well, and that's what they say. Some studies that Henry could have had syphilis or malaria, something that he slept around. So he did have Mary Boleyn as his mistress. So that I think are historical facts.
Right.
So it was a president. Wouldn't it be weird to sleep with a guy that your sister slept with? Yikes.
I mean, let's go back to the last episode where we talked about sharing a husband.
That's for duty. It's different when your mother forces you to marry a guy than when you're sleeping with someone who's married.
Yes.
So think about how much this must have been for Katherine of Aragon. First Mary and then Anne. What do you think? She's going to like the Boleyns? Come on, give me a break. Let's not pit them against each other. What? Let's talk about the facts. What would you think if someone came and did that if you were married? I mean, the guy's to blame, of course. You're not going to be happy with the woman that you helped raise and gave an education to, I think. I don't know. Team Katherine, right?
Team Katherine. I want to know, is there any evidence to show us Catherine's behavior towards Anne once she realized her importance to Henry, Anne's importance to Henry?
There is evidence that she continued to have her in her household, that this was not the first time that she was confronting an affair. Let's think about, Henry Fitzroy and that. I think that she didn't think like we think nowadays. I think that she'd seen this with her father. Her father fathered illegitimate children too and had many affairs. And she saw her mother suffer this. She just thought this is what men do. I don't think she would have put the blame on the woman only. I think she was like, of course, he's a king. He's going to do whatever he wants. That's his prerogative, right? So I think she probably felt sorry for the ones that were just enthralled into having an affair and then cast away when they were painful for her. But in the case of Anne, when the affair is evident, she still has her in her household all the time. She's still, because I think she thinks this is going to be like it was before. It's not going to go into who think that we know what happened, but let's go back and situate ourselves in 1526. Do you think anyone would think that the what happened was going to happen? I don't think so.
Right.
I don't think Anne thought that. I don't think Katherine thought. I don't even think Henry thought that or anything else too much, because I think Henry wakes up and this is a new day to be Henry VIII. Let's see what we can ruin today.
Well, and let's be real too. If Katherine had wanted to remove Anne from her household, Henry could have stopped her, right?
Exactly. We always have to think that any queen consort is in a very difficult position. All that she has are things that the king has given her. He can take away everything. It's not the same as a queen regnant. It's not the same as Elizabeth I. And we see how Elizabeth I behaves differently. Assertiveness, or Mary Tudor, Mary I, they are assertive because they can. Isabella, they are assertive because they can. Still have problems. And that's largely, I think, why Elizabeth doesn't marry, is because Isabella has problems with Ferdinand, because he is a man, because he thinks, he has these affairs and in a personal level, but also politically, he is the king with full rights. You can't. Philip of Habsburg became a king with full rights in England. There's a very good book by Gonzalo Velasco Berenguer, Habsburg England, that talks about this. So, the women are always in a very difficult position, even if you're a queen. And especially if you're losing the king's favor. And I think that's what Katherine starts to realize. And then what kicks in is, if this is above you, Henry, this is God. So that's why she embarks on a battle to defend her right to be Queen of England, really. And she tells Henry, this is not something you can decide. And Henry doesn't like to be told that, right? Does he?
No, he's like a petulant child.
He is a petulant child, a man-child.
We know some of those, don't we? Well,
how difficult that a man-child has all the power. How difficult. Imagine now. I mean, even when the divorce proceedings start, and I don't think this is because people necessarily hated Anne at the time. Everybody's like, whenever the king is like, well, what do you think? They're like, I mean, they're like, a lot of people have a lot of trouble to accept it. For example, Sir Henry Guilford has a verbal fight with Anne Boleyn, and she threatens him, and he's like, he goes to Henry, he's like, I'm done. I've served you since before you were king, but now I'm done. This woman is, you know, is going to be your ruin. And he leaves and he goes to Leeds Castle to die off the poor guy after all he had done for Henry. It's just, I don't think Anne was ready for the pressure of everybody being like, no, what are you talking about? Are you guys crazy? In a way that it wasn't confronting the king, but still doing it, and sometimes confronting the king, especially all these Catholic humanists, right? Like, more. What happens to Thomas? Can you imagine the day the subjects of Henry VIII knew that the brightest mind in England was dead because he would not accept that the king has to get his way?
Right.
I cannot wrap my head around how Henry could kill Thomas More. It's just too much to handle because he was the brightest mind of his time. It's just because he's a child.
Yes. Yeah. And all of the people that were against Anne Boleyn. I mean, we mentioned this in a previous episode, Henry VIII's sister, Mary, who married Charles Brandon.
Very, very, very influential person in the Tudor court.
Yes.
Married to Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, Henry's best friend. Imagine how difficult. Suffolk has to go to tell Catherine about all these things. Henry sends other people. He's not very brave, is he? Sends other people. The only time they're all really confronted is in the Blackfriars trial. But Henry wasn't expecting that either, because Catherine is just very smart and he thinks he's given her people to defend her, but she decides to go and plead directly. That is her prerogative too, and he can't do anything because she's puts on a full display and people love her. Who doesn't love someone who is being truly mistreated, yet comes to the king, kneels in front of him humbly and says, you know I came and made to you. Stop this nonsense. Stop this, for the love of God. Stop this madness. It was madness. I think Henry was starting to have a serious problem with himself at this point. And as soon as Catherine dies, then everything just goes out of control, doesn't it?
It does.
It really does. And I think we have to remember that these are very superstitious people. The first time that Katherine of Aragon has a miscarriage, and it's said in many books, well, she hid it from her father. No, she writes a letter to him later saying, in England, they're very superstitious about stillbirths and things like that. So in a way, she's explained to her dad, I had to keep it secret for a little bit until I knew really if the king was okay about it, because Henry was extremely superstitious. And this is what causes, I think, Anne Boleyn's fall too, right? The day they know that Katherine of Aragon is being buried in Peterborough, she has a miscarriage. I think from the stress too. I think it's very stressful. No woman that is pregnant deserves a guy like Henry next to her.
Right. And we have to look sympathetically towards Anne as well.
Yes, exactly.
Obviously, we're not against Anne Boleyn by any means, because she was as much of a victim.
She sounds to me like a victim of abuse that just can't handle it. And just, she's not in the same position as Catherine. She doesn't have the protection of the emperor, of the Holy Roman Empire. Right. She doesn't have the name of her mother and what her mother and father had done. And all her years on as ambassador. She is 15 years older than her. So this is happening to Catherine in her 40s. Anne is just a very young woman too. And imagine having all these powerful people against you, and then all of a sudden having the king starting to turn against you because you're having these miscarriages. Everybody's like, see, this is what this marriage brought. This is all it bubbles up because they are very superstitious people, and she keeps having these same problems. And then again, it's probably Henry's fault. It was probably him who couldn't conceive viable children. That's why he has just 2 girls that grow into adulthood, with, in the case of Mary Tudor, with lots of health problems too.
Right. And
we don't know if they were probably connected to the abuse that she was receiving too. The abuse, but we can't ignore the fact that Mary Tudor was extremely abused by Anne Boleyn. She was awful to her. Mary was only a child, really. So, but this is what an abuser does to his atmosphere. This is what Henry created for Anne, a psychotic mind, and everyone was against her. And I feel for her deeply, especially when a woman is pregnant. She has to be taken care of, not humiliated in public and abused, right? So
right.
I feel for her deeply. That doesn't stop me from realizing that she didn't behave well in many occasions. And this is what I think has to stop with the Anne Boleyn kind of like, sometimes it's too much. We have to talk about the bad things she did. Like, we talk about the bad things that Isabella of Castile did, like, when the Inquisition, or we have to talk about the real stuff that happened too.
Yeah,
That's how I view it.
I want to talk more about Anne and Mary because we touched base a little bit on Henry, telling Catherine she's no longer queen. She needs to go by Dowager Princess of Wales. And then Henry also goes to his daughter Mary and says, I need you to sign this, saying that, if I recall, you're no longer part of the line of succession because of this. Is that
What a
right?
nice way to say it, Rebecca. Sign this document that says you're a bastard.
Yes.
That the marriage between your parents never happened. That you are illegitimate, and that you are no longer the pearl of my eye.
Right. How
right.
awful for any child to be
that
told
has done
that.
nothing wrong, because Mary Tudor didn't do anything wrong. She was minding her own business in Ludlow, becoming de facto the first Princess of Wales. So in a very big mindset to, I am going to be the next Queen of England. And I think because she was the only surviving child and a girl and the daughter of a helicopter mother, let's not forget, I just feel for her. I'm a firstborn and I'm a girl, and I know the pressure of, you have to be the best, everything. You have to be better than if you were a boy, because you're not a boy. And to be reminded that every day, and then to be mistreated by someone who you've known for many years, because she'd known Anne Boleyn and the Boleyns. So I think she probably was very confused at the beginning. And then that's why she gets sick all the time, I think.
Stress.
Well, she's just manifesting that mental stress. And I think that's why Mary, but then I think there's a thing about Mary that always surprises me. She's gone down in history, as we know, for what she's gone down in history, right? They call her Bloody Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that has to be talked about. She did sentence to death people that shouldn't have had, and they were burned at the stake. How awful of a death. Is that proportionate to what her dad did, or what other rulers like Elizabeth I did, or Edward VI in other places? That maybe we could talk about that some other time. But when and this is still talking about Anne Boleyn, when Anne Boleyn dies and Mary is back into it, she takes care of Elizabeth too.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. Above all, Mary was a Catholic, and you had to be to forgive what people have done to you is key and crucial for your salvation, something we talked about in the previous episode. So for her to take Elizabeth under her wing, to send her gifts, Edward too, despite the fact that they have religious differences and all that, and the relationships ends up in very sour terms. Maybe we could talk about that in some other episode. But it's just, I think it's telling you that Mary was not against Anne Boleyn, or she was against what her father was doing to her. I don't think she blamed Anne Boleyn. I think she thought, well, this woman who was my dad's mistress is just becoming crazy because he's making her crazy because he's going crazy. And then when everything comes back, this is my sister. And she knows that's her sister. She treats her like a sister. So I think we have to start thinking in those terms too. What do you think about all of this? Is this like what you used to listening when you hear about Mary and Anne?
I just keep having more and more questions as you go, because, you had mentioned Anne Boleyn's abuse of Mary, and I think I want you to touch more on what you saw as abuse. What did Anne do to Mary that you see as abusive?
Okay, so now we're going to get deep down into a historiographical problem in the Tudor world. Ooh, sounds like a big phrase, but it is a big phrase. There's one thing. A lot of the reports of the abuse done by Anne Boleyn on Mary are reported by Imperial Ambassador Chapuis, who is not someone that anybody ever takes seriously when they're studying the Tudor. Why? He's an ambassador like any other ambassador. He has interests. Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you think Edward Hall, who was the that was narrating the Chronicles of Henry VIII, didn't have interests? Don't you think that the dispatches of Cromwell don't have conflict of interest? Don't you think that all the papers where Wolsey is talking, he doesn't have interests? Everyone has interests. But when you have someone systematically reporting, and let's not forget, Chapuis had to tell the truth because he was sending these reports to his master, the emperor. He wasn't going to send reports that were not true. Were they some things exaggerated? I'm sure, like every other ambassador does, or any other report. Are they manipulated? Is the information manipulated? Of course. But do you take all the royal sources to be non-biased? That is just ridiculous to think. Every historical document was produced for a reason, right? And to serve a purpose, right? And the majority of them are to serve Henry VIII. Why people don't like quoting Chapuis or think he's not saying the truth is because he goes against Anne Boleyn. But he's reporting serious things that are happening, especially, and this is why Mary finally has to accept the acts of succession, especially after her mother dies, because her protection is almost over. Emperor Charles V is so scared that they're going to poison Mary or kill her or behead her, because her father's, not her father directly, but they come and tell her, her mother tells her to get ready to be a martyr. Catherine of Aragon spent the last months of her life in her own chamber cooking her own food. So when Chapuis is reporting this part of truth and part of not, but he's reporting over time many different incidents, some of them public. And Anne Boleyn is someone who cannot hold back sometimes and says things that she probably regrets later, but she doesn't say very nice things about Mary and Catherine, especially about Mary. I think she didn't dare talk too much about Catherine, which was smart in that sense. Yeah. Maybe she was scared of her, because she knew how much influence she had. But Chapuis, what Chapuis is saying, we can't just dismiss it. The same way we can't dismiss the Spanish Chronicle, like a lot of people do, just because it's not the official account. They're two valid sources. What you can't do is dismiss it. You have to study it. Maybe people need to start learning Spanish. That's what I feel a lot of the times. And then you will get a lot of information. Oh, this seems to coincide in both, or this seems to be very contradictory, but there's so many reports. And it's not only Chapuis. Other Italian ambassadors and other ambassadors are talking about this mistreatment. It's not just Chapuis. So let's think about that. That is important. You cannot dismiss a source just because you don't like what it's saying or it doesn't fit your narrative. I'm sorry, that's not the way historical work works. So that's how I see it.
To prove a point that you had made, because I'm sure we'll get some hate mail and people are going to think we're bashing Anne Boleyn, but we are not. We're trying to have an open discussion about this. But Anne Boleyn did have a tendency of lashing out and saying things that she regretted. And the best example of that is her mentioning about, who was it? Henry Norris looking for dead man's shoes. She obviously said it and she regretted saying it.
Well, that was a great phrase. I mean, I do like the Anne Boleyn phrases. She is. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. If I'm more like anyone, I would be more like Anne Boleyn than Catherine of Aragon in my own personality, especially against Henry. I would just not. I would have to say something, or someone who's threatening me. I'd be like, "You be careful," you know. Just everybody knows I'm nice, but you know. But so I see myself more as an Anne Boleyn person in my personality, in the way I would respond to a threat, than Catherine just being like, I'll think about it. You know, I'm not like that. So I understand why she would lash out to someone that maybe said, you know, you're just I mean, she was called pretty horrible things too. And this is where I think we need to concentrate on. You can't talk about women that way, no matter what they do. You can't insult a woman just because you don't like what she's doing, or no. That is what I think is not acceptable. All the names she was being called. That's what I feel for her, because how can you react to that? I wouldn't react well. So I get what she was doing, but at the same time, I think sometimes it got a bit out of control for her. And she would say things, and Chapuis does say that she threatened. And this is a bit. He mentions it a couple of times, but that, you know, she drops hints that Mary could be poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to know that Mary and Chapuis are preparing an escape plan. So Mary doesn't know if it's going to be, and the fact that her mother was preparing her food, and it's telling you that they were thinking this could happen. Did Anne Boleyn say we don't know, but rumors are rumors. You know what I mean? So the rumor got to them that she was trying to do this. Did you believe them or not? Well, I would be careful if somebody came to me and they were like, careful, you might be poisoned. Mary had an escape plan, because also we have to think the pressure that Henry is feeling from outside. When one of Katherine of Aragon's servants manages to go to Spain, and one of the first things that Henry does is like say, no, you have to go with an English guy. So he sends him with an English guy. The English guy comes back with a broken arm. I don't know what happened there. But the Englishman also comes back with a full report that the Armada is navigating around the waters of England. Charles, in 1534, sends a formal war threat to Henry VIII. This is his aunt, the aunt that had helped him build his empire, that was being treated like a dog. Sorry, we treat dogs better, and we should, because animals are wonderful. You know what I mean when I said a dog. Like, imagine how painful it must have been for Charles, someone who had educated him who had always wanted the best for him. He had met personally several times, that he had been betrothed to Mary, and then to see that because of what he had to do, they're going to be killed. And he's like, you can't do that. This is my aunt. This is my cousin. How dare you? These are descendants of Isabella and Ferdinand. I think Henry's just going crazier, and he's feeling the pressure too. You know?
Because he's getting older and he's so desperate for the male heir. And
exactly.
Here we
have...
have...
Anne Boleyn doesn't give it to him. That is the main problem. Anne Boleyn doesn't give him a son, and she has to go, just like Catherine had to go. She's already had several pregnancies. She has to go. How sad is that? How sad is a man that sends you love letters for years, then makes you go through hell to marry him because he wants it, and he wants it no matter what, and then just casts you after you have a little baby and you have a daughter with him, and that little daughter, what is going to happen to him, to her? Mm-hmm. Is she next after me? And I think that's when Anne is going to be executed, and she sends that sorry to Mary, I think she's telling her, I finally understand. And we're not that different. And I think she's right. They're not that different. It's this man's craziness that brings everybody down with him.
I wonder
and he's looking at me right now.
He's behind me.
She still has the poster for someone who's just listening. She still has the poster of Henry, but I'm not holding back. It's just, actually, it's nice. Just tell him in his face.
Every time.
Sorry, Henry.
What I wanted to say is Katherine of Aragon set the tone as queen consort. I mean, she sat alongside Henry for a couple decades, and Henry falls for Anne Boleyn and wants to have a son by her. But Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr do not have the same strong lineage that Katherine of Aragon had, or the same strong upbringing of understanding the role of a queen consort. And I think that's the biggest problem when Anne comes into Henry's life, is he expects her to be like Catherine, right?
Or does he not? Catherine of Aragon had she was nice and all that, but she had such strong will and personality because of this royalty, and she had such a baggage with, Charles, having his boats around and things like that. I don't think Henry wanted someone like that again.
That's true.
He does try. Well, actually, no, I'm mistaken. He does try to marry Catherine's niece, and he sends Holbein to paint her. That painting of Christina of Denmark is in the National Gallery, that full-length portrait, and he likes it a lot. And Jane Seymour was someone, I mean, I don't want to get into things that I might make mistakes. You can correct me with later on, but I think Jane Seymour, it's someone very close to Catherine of Aragon, and even the way she represented in that Holbein portrait is very similar to the Nuremberg miniatures of Catherine of Aragon, with the same jewel. One thing I did want to say is Catherine of Aragon not only learns from Isabella of Castile, she learns from Elizabeth of York. I think we mustn't forget Elizabeth of York, what she represents, this presence. And Catherine of Aragon tries to emulate Elizabeth of York in many ways, because she admired her too. Elizabeth of York was very important in terms of the illuminated manuscripts that belong to her. She was royalty too, and she has that kind of peaceful demeanor and character that allows her to become influential, right? By being someone close to the king, because she's tender and she's nice and this and that. I think Catherine models herself a lot after Elizabeth, and she liked her. The two connected right away. They loved each other. They liked each other. And they just, imagine knowing someone since they're born, but not knowing them, just seeing portraits every now and again, and then just having that girl finding she's like a nice girl, and you get along, and you finally, she marries your son, and everything's going to be great, and then tragedy hits. Okay. So there's a lot of Elizabeth of York and Catherine of Aragon too.
I've always felt like Henry went from Catherine to Anne, who everyone perceives as so different than Catherine, but really there were similarities between the two.
Yes.
And then he goes to Jane Seymour, who seems to really model herself more like Catherine of Aragon.
Well, that's smart, because we probably doesn't want to lose her head right away, right?
Yeah. She learned from Anne's mistakes.
Well, think about it. We just tell it, but these people were witnessing this. Imagine to marry a guy who was just sentenced his previous wife to death. I would be scared. I mean, Jane must have been so scared. I know she doesn't get the best reputation, but honestly, again, what are you going to do when the king is like, this is what's going to happen? And you're so young. I want to have a little debate about Catherine Howard and what that represents. How old was she when she married Henry?
Well, it's up for debate. I think she could have been, as young as 15. She could have been 15 to 18.
Right.
Young.
Okay.
It's still young.
Okay. So how old was Henry?
Oh, good. He would have been in his 40s, I believe.
Okay, my stomach is revolting right now
Yeah.
because I mean it's a different time, but still there wasn't some 15, 18. What are you talking about, man? Like, it's just that desperate pursuit of another boy because like happened. I'm sure Catherine told Henry many times about Juan, her brother, and how he just died, and then Arthur dies. So Henry knows about that Edward can die, and Edward does die at 15. So it's this pursuit of a male heir no matter what. And I feel for Catherine Howard being a little girl when she's forced to marry this old man, because 40s, I mean, I'm not old and I'm going to turn 40 very soon, but in the 16th century, being 40 something, you were old. Catherine of Aragon dies at 50.
Right.
And she's considered an old woman.
We could say Henry was having a midlife crisis, but that would be modern day midlife crisis.
Right.
Because they didn't live as long.
Right. I think like a lot of people who are victims of their own power, he had been the most outstanding Renaissance prince, praised by Thomas More, praised by Erasmus of Rotterdam. He was tall, he was handsome, he was amazing when he was young. He didn't have the pressure of being the heir until, in Arthur and Catherine's wedding, he's dancing and he takes his jacket off and he's a show off. Henry is a show off. And I think when he's young and attractive, and when Catherine marries him, you asked me in the previous episode if she loved him. I think there was more than that. I think they were attracted to each other a lot. He was tall, handsome, educated, and he could fall in love like he does with Anne Boleyn, and he's very romantic, and he has this culture. He's been raised in this culture of chivalry, and he dedicates everything, sur cœur loyal, and all these things that he's doing for Catherine. And she gets the best Henry, by the way. She gets the best Henry. She gets Henry and she's a bit older than him, and she's been an ambassador. She has all this experience, and she's the daughter of these, and she's exotic in England because she always has an accent. Mm-hmm. She looks like an English person, really. This is another misconception about Catherine of Aragon, that she was dark haired and had dark skin just because she was from Spain. I'm from Spain. People in Spain, and then the Trastamas came from the north of Europe. She had blue eyes, very fair skin. This is something Mary Tudor inherits from her mom. They have skin like porcelain. They said this is very important in the 16th century because skin gives you a healthy look, right? Her hair was just like all these portraits that we see of red-haired women with clear eyes. Just like you, Rebecca, very beautiful women. That Catherine was one of those. She was very short, but I think a lot of people were very short. I think Henry was very, very tall. So he would have, imagine Henry in 1510, 1511, when they had just started their marriage, and they had not done, it was starting to do a lot of things, but all the baggage wasn't there.
Right.
And then Henry in the 1520s becomes a different guy. I mean, he grows a beard. If that is not starting a midlife crisis, just because Francis has a beard, I'm growing a beard. And it's Catherine that says that you're ridiculous. If he jumps off a bridge, and he's like, I'm jumping right after him.
But I'm going to jump better.
Yeah, and Catherine is like, I don't like that beard, take it off. And some of those horn boot miniatures, he has a beard in some, he doesn't have a beard in some. And in the ones that he doesn't have a beard, and these are painted just when he starts with Anne Boleyn, he's not looking that great. So I'm sorry for Anne Boleyn, she didn't get the best Henry. I'm sorry for the rest of the wives, they didn't get the best Henry.
No, I'm
definitely. Catherine got the best Henry, and he just couldn't handle her because she was too much.
She wasn't too much, though, was she?
No.
She was perfect.
Well, it's a person. I think they just Catherine and Henry were polar opposite. Henry was, and I can relate more to Henry's character, someone who was, a bit of a show off and always has is always like wanting to party. And Catherine was more of a sound person, would enjoy partying and all that, but was just more like, no, we're building something bigger. Because one of the first things that is a report back when they marry is he's just partying all day, while she's signing treaties to to become part of international alliances in her castle and saying, you can't treat the King of England like a boy. Well, he's having a little party now, but he'll be back and he's ruling for sure. He's ruling. It's not me ruling in behind the scenes. And that's what Wolsey takes advantage of and is really smart to do. And that's why Wolsey and Catherine have a very tense relationship. She tries to win him over until the last very day. And he also is sorry to what he has done to Catherine at the end of his life. Because she wasn't a bad person. She made mistakes, of course, but she wasn't a bad person. And she always treated those people, even her enemies, with respect. And I think some people can't handle that. It just gives you power. Yeah. I couldn't do it.
I think it's fair to say that Anne Boleyn wasn't a bad person.
No, it is fair to say that. Of course, it's Henry. It's Henry, and not just Henry, it's all the interests. People tend to forget that despite the fact that this is a love story between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, this is a bigger thing. It's a Spanish alliance or a French alliance. That's what it is. That's what it represents. So I know it's a juicy love story, but it's a shift in the international politics of Henry VIII too. It's bigger than just the love story between Anne and Henry. It's bigger than Anne, and it's even bigger than Henry. Henry's also responding to all this stress coming from outside because he mingles in international affairs, but he doesn't have the actual power to make these things a realization because the two men that are really fighting the battle in Europe are Francis and Charles. And the second that Henry's not going to have a male heir with Catherine, because they think, well, she's older, and Francis calls her old and decrepit, he loses kind of his appeal to them too, because he's like, he can't even have a male heir. So this is pressure on Henry too. Henry's also submitted to a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm defending Henry VIII.
I can't believe it either.
What are you doing to me, Rebecca? You're turning me into a different person.
Well, Dr. Emma, we have been at this for a while today, and I think we could talk about this for 2 more hours because there's so much ground to cover. I want to end this by just checking in with you and seeing if there's any big moment that I missed or that we missed in this conversation today that you want to make sure that we touch on, or if you think we're good and we'll save it for another episode.
I would just go back to the Book on Matrimony, 1526, Erasmus of Rotterdam, frontispiece by Holbein, the same year that Holbein arrives. And it's a book to defend Catholic matrimony. If that is not starting the battle before it starts, I don't know what it is. So we have to stop thinking that Catherine was old-fashioned or came from the old religion. She was at the forefront of not only the Reformation of the Catholic faith, but she was in the forefront of the revolution of women's education. So we have to thank her for that, and we have to give her a place in history for that. That would be my biggest takeaway. Not confronting anyone, telling the true facts, but also giving Katherine of Aragon her true place in history, which is a big one, especially for women's history.
It is. Dr. Emma, thank you so much for coming on the show again today and enlightening us.
Thank you, Rebecca. It was great.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.